Another trade deadline day gives way to another captivating pennant race. The Reds have leapfrogged the Brewers after being swept by Milwaukee coming out of the All-Star break. Now the Cubs have ridden a long winning streak and batting outbursts to play their way back into the divisional title conversations. But the trade deadline itself has determined a truth that can't be ignored anymore. John Mozeliak must go. So let's open the files of Central Intelligence and find out why. You've been recruited to join forces and learn more about the top news and stories from the NL Central right here on Central Intelligence, a Slasher Sports baseball podcast presented by Slasher Sports and always available on our YouTube channel and our Spotify podcast feed. I am Special Agent in charge of Nationally Central Affairs, Steve Beck. Your experienced host, if you will. You can follow the podcast on social media at Slasher Baseball. You can share your comments and show suggestions via email, slasherbaseball@yahoo.com. And be sure to join two growing Slasher Sports communities on Discord and the Slasher Sports Baseball Facebook group. This past trade deadline, we had a lot of MLB trade deadline updates. We went live on our Facebook group. It was great. We had some wonderful interactions, and we thank everybody that was involved in that. So that's just a couple of ways that you can follow this podcast and follow everything going on at Slasher Sports. You can also go to slashersports.com. You can do some spying that way. But wait, there's more. Slasher Sports Baseball also analyzes the American League every weekend in our AL Slashlines podcast. Yours truly handles the hosting duties. And since it's college football season, it's only 4 weeks away. You can check out insightful and unique reporting by Christian Rao at Slasher U. It has its own YouTube channel feed. And you can go to X or Twitter or whatever they're calling themselves these days. It is SlasherU_. We've been saying for weeks now here on the Central Intelligence podcast and on various, shares that we do, that the NL Central is the most fun and fascinating division in Major League Baseball. Not a lot of people are saying that. We've been saying it from the outset since the beginning of 2023. It is my personal favorite division, even when we're not talking about the type of exciting races and young teams like the Pirates and Reds, and even the Cubs coming out of a rebuild, battling it out with the people that have been at the top of the division the last 2 years, the Brewers and the Cardinals. It's just fascinating. I mean, they're pretty much similar markets. I mean, St. Louis and Chicago, certainly as far as media goes, probably have an advantage over the other three teams. But for the most part, I mean, there's not any drastic. We're not talking New York City and Boston and Tampa Bay, let's say, like we're having the AL East, or you don't have the NL East battles, with the Mets and the Phillies and the DC market with the Nationals. You don't have that in Atlanta. You don't have that diversity of markets. So for us, okay, maybe we're a little slanted. Maybe we just love the NL Central a little bit more than other people do, and we're glad that you joined here because obviously you are either interested in the NL Central or a fan of an NL Central team. So we're really happy to have you here. But something else happened here at the deadline. And another thing that we were at the forefront of is that we were telling you here on the Central Intelligence podcast that the Major League trade deadline, in essence, is going to revolve around the NL Central. And we're going to go over some of the ways that happened here in just a little bit, but that absolutely played out, not only with the number of trades made by teams like the Cardinals and the Pirates, the Brewers, the Cubs. The Reds didn't do as much at the deadline, but did they really have to do a whole lot? So everybody made some kind of a move. Some of the decisions made by the team, specifically the Cubs, and to a lesser extent, the Pirates, the decisions really to hang on to certain players, that really changed the market. People were scrambling in that last day. Now, we were telling you all along that David Bednar wasn't getting traded out of Pittsburgh. It just wasn't going to happen. Neither was Mitch Keller. But, in order to get the buzz and things like that, you had all of the major media outlets. David Bednar, he could go to Arizona. He could go, to the Yankees. He could go here. He could go there. Yeah, they created all of these stories that just flat out had no real basis other than the fact that you wanted to get people to listen here. We're a little bit more subtle. When you look at me, you wouldn't think of subtle, but it's a little bit more subtle. And we're kind of proud of the fact that that we have been kind of playing that tune, tooting that horn all season long. That this was going to be the place. This is going to be the primary focus of the trade deadline, and I think on many levels it played out that way. They weren't the only teams making deals, certainly, but on many levels, it certainly kind of played out that way. So we are going to go and look at the deadline. We're not going to go over every single trade and break down all that analysis. You've already probably heard that ad nauseum, but we are going to have our takes on maybe the one thing, the one takeaway for each of the 5 National League Central teams that you should look at a little bit more closely and kind of decide for yourself, is what we're saying, does it have validity? I think we've sort of earned that listen because of what we've been talking about here going on. And we're also going to talk about the situation in St. Louis. If you've been listening and watching to all of the previous Central Intelligences, it may seem like I'm a St. Louis Cardinals basher. I am not. Okay, I'm not a St. Louis Cardinals fan. But I mean, I respect the history of that organization. And it's heartbreaking. If you're a baseball fan, I mean, everybody has their favorite teams. Within this division, it's the Pirates for me because I live here in Pittsburgh and I've lived here for the better part of 40 years. So yes, I mean, I have some regional bias, if you will, with that. But I mean, the St. Louis Cardinals fan base deserves better than what they've had to deal with here over the last, really, since the pandemic. Yes, and I know that they've made the playoffs and things like that, but it's been a matter of putting fingers in the dam, really, for most of the last 4 years since the shortened 2020 season, and I think the bill has now come due. And we're going to talk about the situation in St. Louis and a conclusion that we've drawn that I think, based on some feedback of articles and video shares on our Facebook group and other places, I think it's a large majority of the Cardinal fan base, I think, is going to agree with the conclusion that we come to here. But first, let's do some background checks, see what actually happened on the field, whether it be decisions, about personnel or about contracts or what actual game action. Let's check our background checks, and then we'll talk about the one takeaway you should consider as being valid takeaways for each of the teams coming out of the deadline. I want to start with the Cubs, because at the top here, we sort of tease that the Cubs have played their way back into a into a playoffs spot. Whether it be a wild card or whether it be even winning the division. And I have to admit, I'm a little surprised. I've been saying for the last couple of weeks, and incorrectly it seems, at least at this point, that it was a 2-team race now. It was the Brewers, it was the Reds. But I mean, the Cubs, 5 times in games since the All-Star break, they've scored 10 or more runs. And we've talked about their run differential. A lot of that has come at the expense of the Pittsburgh Pirates, the games that they have played. But it's not just the Pirates, and they're actually adding to that run differential. They're one of the, I think they are the only team in the National League Central with a positive run differential. That's going to win you some ball games. And quite honestly, what they did on the field, these players and manager David Ross, in essence, showed Jed Hoyer in the front office we are contenders now. Do not take away from what we have. Please add to it. This rather large winning streak and the way that they were winning games played a major role in the front office saying, we're not listening on Cody Bellinger. And I have to agree, seeing how things played out, that was the right decision. When I first heard that, I'm like, all right, it's not that they were fooling themselves, but I'm like, can't they really get some significant pieces? Because he was the premier bat on the market, hands down. Yeah, I mean, he was the premier offensive player. So they pulled him off the market. They also did not move Marcus Stroman. Now that was more determined by his struggles coming out of the All-Star break. I'm not saying that he was trying to influence him getting traded. He's made it very clear that he wants to do an extension and stay in Chicago long term. He really plays. He really loves playing at Wrigley and loves playing for the Cubs. I think Stroman in that market, he's a perfect fit. I will call shenanigans if suddenly now his first start out of the All-Star break, he's lights out again. But yeah, this isn't a conspiracy theory podcast. Okay, this is a baseball podcast, specifically an NL Central podcast. So the Cubs, they did add, adding Candelario, bringing him back. He was originally a Cub. He was traded. I want to say in the World Series year he was traded to Detroit, and they got him from the Nationals. So the Cubs, their story for this past week or so has been the fact is that they have played their way back into the NL Central race. The big story for the Reds, and it's not just because they weren't as active as perhaps they would have liked to have been at the deadline. I still think it would have been nice if they could have gotten at least one starting pitching, not necessarily an ace, but at least one more starting pitching. It didn't work out. The fit that I thought was a natural was Michael Lorenzen coming back to where his career started, and that's the Cincinnati. But it was the front office and Nick Krall giving manager David Bell a 3-year contract extension through the 2026 season. Now, I'm not a huge fan of David Bell's in-game strategies. I think he's a bit over the top when it comes to, arguing with umpires. I think he has a hot-headed tendency. It's almost like, you and me against the world when he's talking to his players. And that can work. With young players, I don't know how effective it is in a long-term basis, but let's make the comparison with college football or college basketball or any collegiate sport. When a coach or a manager that you have come to trust that has shown that they have your back and they want your best interest and your best image of a future, those players leave the program. Whatever David Bell is doing, and certainly you can't argue the fact that he's got his players' backs. He has, even in losing times, and he's not afraid to mix things up. I think of the big Amir Garrett blow up when Garrett was still with the Reds, and the Garrett went and basically challenged the entire Pittsburgh Pirates dugout. David Bell was uber supportive of what Garrett did. So on the surface, it seems like it's a no-brainer move. It'll be interesting to see over the course of this extension as these young players mature and get their feet under them and gain more confidence with more success. And no doubt the Reds are going to continue to have on-field success just based on their talent. It'll be interesting to see how long Bell's act will keep being called back for encores with this core team. But either way, I mean, congratulations to David Bell. I'm sure I'm the minority on this one. I think everyone wants to celebrate what David Bell has done, and he has done just a magnificent job. If he's not the manager of the year in the National League this year, I don't know who is. I mean, he really has gotten the best out of all of these young players. So, I mean, kudos to him. But I'm wondering how long his act is going to play in the Cincinnati clubhouse. As for the Brewers, they had I think what I would call a character win in the series opener. Actually, I'm sorry, in the second game of the series against the Nationals. They could have like slumped their shoulders and kind of slinked away from Atlanta after getting swept. I mean, yes, there was some high scoring games. Their bullpens started to show some wear and tear. I mean, they've been wonderful all year. I'm sure that there is some effects of overuse out of necessity, not out of Craig Counsell not knowing how to manage a bullpen. I think he's proven that he is a whiz at managing bullpens and pitching staff. But there's just been so many injuries to the starting rotation. They've had to really rely on that bullpen on a regular basis. But they didn't. I mean, they had a bullpen implosion. That's what cost them the opening game against the Nationals. But then they came back the next night, post deadline. Some of the additions like Mark Canha and Carlos Santana were in the lineup, and they won, and they showed, oh, no, yeah, look, we're okay. And I think they were grateful that Matt Arnold in the front office went out and added aggressively, not flashy stars. So Mark Canha is quite a grab for them. But they added pieces that were going to help them from a practical standpoint. So any offensive ad was going to benefit the Brewers. And they did a good job at that. And the Brewers showed their appreciation by winning that game post deadline. And I think they have to have a shot of confidence. They play. And when you listen to them in interviews, whether pregame, postgame, win, lose, they know they have the talent mix to win this division. They're not taking it for granted. They're not doing a St. Louis Cardinals approach. They know they need to fight and claw, and they need to execute on every level in order to win the NL Central. They know they have some stiff competition, but the Brewers have got to feel good about them. Now, here in Pittsburgh, where we record this, the Pirates, even as they move older veterans out and they make personnel decisions about who they feel is going to be part of the solution going forward into 2024 and beyond, the Pirates' good young core, this could easily turn into the most competitive division in the National League as early as next year. And that's including, all the mega payroll teams in the NL East. This could easily be the most competitive division. But even with their struggles, as they're bringing young players in, there's going to be an inconsistency. That. They've gotten some really good pitching performances. For them at this point, they obviously want to do better than they did last year, and they're on pace to do that by about 10 games. But they also don't want to finish last. They have almost a little mini pennant race within the actual pennant race where they're not going to make the playoffs, they're not going to win the division, but they can stay out of last place. And they can take advantage of the way that the Cardinals are stumbling. So, you look at games, even in like losing efforts. I mean, their ace, Mitch Keller, pitched really, really well against Zach Wheeler. He only lasted 5 2/3 innings. He kind of struggled, in the 6th inning. But before that, it was pitch for pitch with Zach Wheeler. Zach Wheeler is a legit major league top of the rotation pitcher. They hung in there. Oviedo who they got from the Cardinals, has found the promise that he displayed as a rookie in St. Louis on a more consistent basis now. He had his moments last year and early this year. He has been very consistent. Even Quinn Priester, who has not pitched well, statistically, he has not pitched well, but he's had, 2-3 inning stretches where nobody could touch him. He's having problems with his command. He's not throwing his pitches for strikes. I think that is more a matter of inexperience and incompetence. I mean, I can't imagine having the talent of a Quinn Priester and having so much success at the minor league levels, what it would be like to now go into the major leagues and have to play, the Braves, and have to play the Phillies, and teams with just thumper kind of lineup. But he got 2 wins. He pitched well enough to get 2 wins. So the Pirates, they took care of business. The game after the trade deadline, where a lot of their veteran stability pieces are now gone. There's not a whole lot other than Andrew McCutchen and Brian Reynolds. I guess you can call Brian Hayes a veteran. He just came off of the IL. But really, I mean, their future is now here in Pittsburgh, and we're seeing flashes of that. Are they going to finish above 500? And no, they're not, barring some kind of miraculous maximizing of all the talent on that roster now. But, the Pirates, they're doing better than their run differential says they can. And I think with each win, they had a big walk-off win against the Phillies, this past weekend. With every moment like that, I think they can breathe a little easier. They can relax a little bit more, and they're going to show that they are for real going forward. And then we're going to look at the St. Louis Cardinals. This week's background check brings out a couple of things. They were everybody's favorite to win the NL Central. Now, let me say that I have stated in print, on other podcasts, certainly here in Central Intelligence, I never bought that. I thought the Cardinals were going to struggle. I didn't think it was going to be like this because there's just so much talent on that roster. But you know how many days the Cardinals have spent in first place in 2023? 2. This is being recorded on August the 2nd, the day after the trade deadline. So that means it is exactly 4 months to the date since the St. Louis Cardinals even sniffed first place in the NL Central. And they were the flat-out NL Central favorites. Everybody was slurping on the St. Louis Cardinals. They were looking at the tradition and the track record, and they weren't looking at the hurdles in front of them. Now, even with all of that, now they're dealing with the fact that Brendan Donovan, he's the guy in last week's episode where I said, for me, he was the one Cardinal hitter that was untouchable. Not that they should have traded Arenado or Paul Goldschmidt, but at this stage, he is the most valuable bat and piece, and fielding piece, because he can play everywhere. I mean, that's sort of the that just adds to the value of Brendan Donovan. He's been having problems all year with an ulnar inflammation in his forearm. Now that they know for sure they're out of it, and they were, cleaning house at the deadline, they decided that he should have surgery and have it early enough that he can be back for spring training next year. And Brendan Donovan, as wonderful he is with the bat, his ability to play the corner outfield spots, to play second, to play short, to play third, to play first, the fact that they can put him almost anywhere on the field on any given day, that is way more valuable than trying to limp home and pass the Pirates and not finish in last place. So now the Cardinals, that's the big story that's not involved with the trade deadline, is that Brendan Donovan is now out for the year. And that is a player that's taken a vital organ out and failing to transplant a new one in. I mean, it's something that it's going to make for a long year. Tommy Edman is hurt. They're not going to really rush him back. We'll talk about the deals here, in just a second. But the Cardinals really tough week coming out of the deadline. And when you talk to Cardinal fans, when I say talk, you're tweeting back and forth, you're having email conversations or chat room conversations. They're really angry. They're really angry. And so we're going to segue from the background check for the Cardinals this year here on Central Intelligence to the trade deadline takeaway. And we're going to start with the team that did they make the most moves? Yes. But John Mozeliak must go. And not just because of the fact that zero, big, fat, zero amount of the acquisitions are going to have any sort of impact, significant impact this season for sure, and probably not until maybe midway through 2024. He came out and said, our priority is pitching, pitching, pitching. And in reality, they traded away as much pitching as they acquired back. This was one of those unique moments for a general manager where you can truly put your stamp on the organization. Now, again, he's been there for not quite 2 decades, but pushing that. He took over for Walt Jocketty. And I will always say, and when I talk to Cardinal fans or people that just have questions about the Cardinals, his greatest successes were really players that were drafted, developed under Walt Jocketty's time in St. Louis. He wasn't even the first choice to replace Walt Jocketty. That was Chris Antonetti of Cleveland. Cleveland offered him a promotion. They bumped Mark Shapiro out of the true day-to-day GM slot, made Antonetti the GM. And so he returned to Cleveland, and then they offered the job to Mozeliak. He has made some really tough trades. He traded Jim Edmonds. I mean, at the right time. I mean, Edmonds is hugely popular in St. Louis, but injuries were starting to wear down. He just has such a reckless abandon, especially playing the outfield. It was obvious that it was going to start to catch up with him. Edgar Renteria left before he took over, but and then they needed to find a shortstop. They just didn't have a shortstop after Renteria left for the Red Sox after the 2004 season. He's the guy that on his watch let Albert Pujols go. That really can't be put completely at the feet of John Mozeliak. That's really the ownership ultimately signs off on that, but you don't let Albert Pujols go. And you can't even say, oh, but look what happened when he went to Anaheim. Would that have happened if he stayed in St. Louis? Maybe. But, when you let the face of your franchise walk away, now you're scrambling to find a new face of the franchise. And they looked in a lot of really weird places. Johnny Peralta, Peter Bourgeot, Alan Craig, they were given contracts that to this day make no sense, even in retrospect make no sense. But the Cardinals were winning. They were feasting on some of the weaknesses and ups and downs in the NL Central. And they capitalized on it. To the credit, they capitalized. LaRussa left. Longtime organizational man Mike Schilt was hired. He did a tremendous job. And then this was really, the first chamber bullet that you could put in for Mozeliak. Well, actually, Pujols was the first. This was the second chamber bullet. They let Mike Schilt go because Schilt had the audacity as a baseball man, as an on-field manager saying, I don't understand some of these decisions that you're making. I don't understand why you're wanting me to play this player, why you're trying to interfere with this, why you're trying to change what has been successful, what has been the Cardinal way for decades. He was fired. In comes Ali Marmol. Third bullet in the chamber. Skip Schumacher in Miami is proving that he was the guy to replace him. But let's return to the deadline here for a second, the deadline takeaway. They did not maximize their opportunity to set the market here. They traded Jordan Hicks, which again, long history of injuries. He's really, really, when he came back and was finally healthy, Mozeliak instructed that they should try to make him a starter. He's a leverage end of the game reliever. Of course, he was going to struggle and fail as a starter. That's not really how he was utilized early in his career. And you just don't suddenly say, well, he's going to be a starter. The cases of like the John Smoltzes that go from starter, Cy Young candidate starter to all-star closer, back to all-star starting pitching. They don't happen very often. Of all the trades that they made, sending Hicks to the Blue Jays got them probably the most in return. Adam Kloppenstein, big guy, bulldog mentality. He struggled at high A last year. He found it here at Double A. They've already moved him to Triple A. He's going to be in the rotation at some point next year. He's not a staff ace, but he is one of those guys that you can count on, to give you a quality start, most outings, be able to miss bats. He's the kind of pitcher that they went out and said, "This is what we're going to get." Now, the more highly regarded thing coming back from the Blue Jays was a Netherlands native, Sem Rabasa. He was the 7th rated prospect in the Blue Jays. I thought that was a little inflated. I have seen him pitch. I don't know that he is really going to maximize what scouts see in him, but it's still a great grab. He's also a AAA Memphis. So, okay, not bad there. They got 2 pitchers back for 1. But then they traded Jordan Montgomery and Chris Stratton, who for me is actually the most valuable part of that deal, to the Texas Rangers, a team in first place, a team that wants to go all in. So you could have kind of maximized your return on this. They got John King, lefty reliever, who was basically failed miserably every opportunity that the Rangers gave him. And they gave him every opportunity to be an end-of-the-game reliever, and he just failed miserably. So now he's in the bullpen. So already the worst bullpen in the National League is now not only depleted because Hicks is gone and because Stratton is gone. Now you've got John King there, and he is not a solution. He's a placeholder at best. They did get a highly regarded pitcher, Takeo Roby. Yeah, he was a high school pitcher, so you expect him to struggle a little bit, but he's had ERAs, pushing 5. It was over 5 this year and just under 5 at Double A. When you start to get into more serious competition here, in the Ranger system, is he highly regarded? He is. None of his pitches really grade out like at 50, 55. They're all in like the 4. I take it back. His curveball is graded at a 50. And it's a pretty good curveball. It can be a knee bender at times, but his other pitches are 45s and 40s. So that's fine that he was highly regarded as a prospect. And again, you try to go projectability. Young high school pitcher. He could still grow into his frame. He could still maximize that talent. But really, what is that ceiling? What you see from Roby might be all that you will ever get out of him. So to give up Jordan Montgomery, again, rental, I understand. Chris Stratton, okay, rental again. Chris Stratton is going to be the most valuable part of this deal. As good as Jordan Montgomery might pitch for the Rangers, Chris Stratton and his flexibility to be able to handle any kind of bullpen role, huge grab in that. And then they got Thomas Sagassi, who, his hit at every level. He's hit above 300 at every level, other than I think the half a season after the draft in 2020. He didn't, but every as we played, he's gone from low A to high A to Double A. Spent some time at Triple A, not much. He's hitting above 300. He's not a slugger. They project he could be a slugger. Now, he was blocked by Corey Seager and Marcus Simeon on the Rangers, so the Rangers could afford to let him go because he was never going to produce at that level. I mean, some scouts will tell you, oh, his power, his bat's going to take it to the next level. But don't you already have your shortstop of the future, Mason Wynn? Isn't he now knocking on the door? Isn't he going to be called up in Memphis pretty soon and given the everyday shortstop job now that they traded Paul DeJong? And they got nothing for Paul DeJong. The whole idea was to maximize bats to bring in pitching. They got a 24-year-old pitcher that's not even on the radar for the Blue Jays. And I covered the Blue Jays for another site, so I know the Blue Jay system pretty well. He's 24 at high A, and he only just now got promoted to high A. He had been at the Dunedin low A complex, Matt Svanson. So in essence, they just gave Paul DeJong away to give Mason Wynn the job at shortstop, which is in theory, it's a good idea. Get his feet wet. But you don't give a guy away, especially in a market where hitters that could make a difference in a lineup were at a premium. You don't give them away for a 24-year-old that just got promoted to high A. A horrible trade. Now, the last-minute deal, you got 3 pretty highly regarded prospects from the Orioles. The Orioles system is deep, so even though they might be ranked at number 14 or number 16, okay, in most organizations, they would be top 10, maybe even flirting with top 5. But again, Cesar Prieto is a shortstop. Now, he's been crushing the ball. So this guy can hit. I don't know how much power he's going to ultimately develop. So he's more of a slasher kind of a hitter. But he's another guy that his best position is shortstop or second base. And you've got, you have Nolan at second base there. You've got Brendan Donovan, Tommy Edman. You've got all these guys that are blocking him at second base too. So where is the value of getting a player like that back? The lefty starter they got, Drew Rom, at A, both levels of A, he was pretty good. He hasn't had an ERA under 4 in 2 seasons at Double A. Is he blocked by some more highly regarded prospects in the Orioles system? To a degree. But again, when he moved up a level to be challenged, all gone. I've been spending a lot of time here on the Cardinals and the trade deadline takeaway for there because Mozeliak wet the bed here. He did not really get the high-level pitching possibility, except in the Jordan Hicks deal, that he was saying he was going to get. And he has all of these outfielders and all of these bats that he could easily, in this market, gotten a haul for, and he didn't execute the deal. For whatever reason, it doesn't matter what the reason. The only reason it's obvious because they felt they weren't getting value offers for Dylan Carlson, or I doubt Newbar or Walker were being offered around Alec Burleson. There's a lot of talk about Alec Burleson getting moved. They didn't cash in. They had the assets. So this is a pattern. This is a downhill slide. It's sort of like being in quicksand. The Cardinals are in quicksand right now. A little bit each week, each month. And if you want to project it out over the last 4 years, they have sunk. Okay. And their ability to maneuver and try to save themselves has been reduced. He was extended through the 2025 season. Bill DeWitt's going to just have to eat the money and say, you know what, you had your opportunity and you talked a good game. This is unacceptable what you did with our assets. So we'll move you to, I don't know, ticket office, offer you an opportunity to scout, whatever it would be to maximize the contract. But Bill DeWitt might need to eat this contract. And Cardinal fans that might agree with me, I my heart truly aches for you. As a baseball fan, it's good for the St. Louis Cardinals to be competitive and to be good. They don't have to win the division every year, but to be in the conversations, to be good, to be competitive, it's important for Major League Baseball. We're talking about growing the game internationally and all. How about spending some time on growing regional fan bases? Everybody loves the Braves. They're a regional team, but in the Mid-South, and certainly up through the Midwest, even in areas that have other teams, whether it be the Royals, whether Kansas City and the Royals, or the White Sox, Southern Illinois, the Cardinals are in, and it pains me to see you guys go through this. It really does. I'm not a Cardinal fan. You can't convert me, but I do want you to succeed. And John Mozeliak is not the guy that's going to get there, so he must go. Okay. The takeaway with the Cubs is that they came to the realization that they had the pieces in place. So it's the moves they didn't make that are you kept Cody Bellinger. I think you certainly have the payroll flexibility that you could sign him long term. At the very least, you give him a qualifying offer. Because I don't believe that he was offered a qualifying offer, so I think they can offer him one. I could be wrong on that. And if I am, I apologize for that. But either way, the Cubs have the payroll oomph, if you will, where they can sign him long term. So that is the biggest takeaway for me from the Cubs. They pulled Cody Bellinger off the market, and that radically changed the entire face of the 2023 trade deadline. All of these teams that were counting their dollars saying, we're gonna get Cody Bellinger. We're gonna get him. He's a rental. We don't gonna pay too much. Cubs totally screwed up. Teams like the Yankees, there's a multiple amount of teams that could have gotten bats. Going back to the Cardinal discussion earlier, that opened the door for John Mozeliak to move one of their outfielders, and they didn't. Cubs maximized their flexibility in the market, picking up Candelario. It was really good. Jose Cuas from the Royals might not seem like a big deal. That was a great acquisition. They're moving guys off the roster that didn't have a long things. It makes me sad to see Tran Mancini get DFA'd. Maybe it just he's going to find a home somewhere. It might not necessarily be with a contender, but he showed what kind of veteran stability piece he can be. Growing young talent when he spent all those years in Baltimore when they were so bad. So maybe Mancini lands in a place. I'd love to see him land in Pittsburgh. You can't put him in St. Louis because they already have 8 billion outfielders. But Trey Mancini, go to a team, Kansas City, Detroit, the Rockies, somewhere where he is going to make a difference with those young players. For the Brewers, now Mark Canha and Carlos Santana, they're going to make the most notable, most obvious impacts on the success of the Brewers as they go and try to win the NL Central. At the very least, hang on and be a wild card team. I think they're going to win the Central. But Mark Canha and Carlos Santana, great acquisitions. That's not the biggest takeaway. The biggest takeaway is that Matt Arnold is masterful at the art of bringing in pieces that fit that puzzle. Doesn't have to be, the end pieces. Okay? It's that little eyelash or a whisker or part of a windmill or whatever that puzzle is. He finds those pieces that fit that puzzle that you don't try to force and hammer, try to make it fit. Canha and Santana will be wonderful contributors down the stretch, but picking up Andrew Chapin to be that second reliable left-handed option in the bullpen, that was a masterstroke, especially since Wilson, who they were counting on, Justin Wilson, to come back off of a serious injury and be that guy. He got hurt almost right away. So they didn't sit and wait. They went and got Andrew Chapin. Chapin has a ridiculous ground ball rate. He's got good strikeout rates. If you take away a 2/3 of an inning, 5-run performance against the Braves coming out of the All-Star break. He has a sub-4 ERA. Again, strikeout rate is terrific, about 32%, a little higher than that, but around 32%. His walk rate's a little higher than you would like, perhaps. It's 12% this year. But in the aggregate, what he does as far as getting outs, again, he's not going to get a lot of. He does strike people out, but I wouldn't say he's got swinging strike stuff. He knows how to pitch. He sets up hitters really, really well. So great pickup there for the Brewers. In Cincinnati, Sam Moll, just like we talked about with Chapin, he may prove to be as valuable as picking up a starting pitcher. They didn't get a starting pitcher to bolster the rotation. A lot of young pitchers coming up on innings, not innings limits, but going to that limit that they haven't been before. The old Star Trek thing, going where no one's gone before. It's going to happen with some of these younger pitchers. Hunter Green will be back in August. They say Nick Lodolo will be back in August. I'm not so sure about that one. But Sam Moll is one of those guys that just kind of languish in obscurity for a team like the A's. But you put him in a pennant race situation, suddenly people are going to say, oh, wow, where'd this guy come from? His ERA is not the great. He also had like one or two bad outings there, but he's striking out people about 30%. His walk rate is less than 8%, which is tremendous. 50% ground ball rate. That's what you want with a lefty coming out in critical situations, coming out of the bullpen. So does he slide into a more leveraged situation there in Cincinnati? I think he does. He's got the stuff. They've got a lot of electric young bullpen pieces, Diaz and Lucas Sims, but they also have those role kind of righties. But now Moll becomes a second left-handed option, probably the primary left-handed option. So he makes a huge difference. We're going to wrap up with the Pittsburgh Pirates. The takeaway here is the Pirates aren't just going to keep people on the roster because they were highly regarded prospects, or that they were a piece of a deal when you were moving veteran players in the past. That's not good enough for Ben Cherington anymore. That's not good enough for anybody, certainly not the fans. Nobody in the front office feels that's good enough. And two prime examples around the deadline here. About a week before the deadline, their former number one pick, Travis Swaggerty, who was applauded. They thought, well, maybe Neil Huntington hasn't totally lost. He lost 2 full seasons, one to COVID, another to shoulder surgery, and now it's been chronic migraines and vertigo. Travis Swaggerty cannot stay healthy. So despite all of the hopes so many fans and certainly front office and scout types placed on Travis Swaggerty and his role in the Pirates going forward, he has shown that he's, at least in Pittsburgh, he's not going to put it all together. So he was DFA'd. Nobody claimed him. Pirates, I guess, could reclaim him. But really, they weren't going to hang on to him, try to make room for him on the 40-man roster just because he was a former number one pick. And they traded Rodolfo Castro, he was an international signing, but another highly regarded guy that everyone said, oh, he smashes lefties. And he does. He crushes left-handed pitching. He's okay with the glove. He just has no clue against right-handed pitching. He's a guy that you could, I guess, keep him in the minors as depth. They choose to move him for a projectable pitcher that will probably slide into either high A Bradenton, or I would not be surprised if they put him at double A Altoona. Send him to the Phillies. Again, a guy that, even Cherington had placed a lot of faith and a lot of hope. He was given his opportunity to secure his spot in the future, and he failed. Now, he's going to probably platoon, in Philly, which is fine. I mean, the Phillies have so much offense. If you've got like a utility role player that only plays against lefties, okay. I mean, they can afford to do that. Pirates couldn't. So now Alika Williams and Luaver Piguero and Nick Gonzalez. Now you're seeing the true future of the Pirates' middle infield. But you can't see them unless you say goodbye to guys that previously you were trying to groom for that job. And that's my takeaway here. There's no more excuses for the Pirates. Ben Cherington is not going to accept. He's never been a guy that accepts excuses. He'll explain things, but doesn't make excuses. But he's not willing to just tolerate it because they were a number one pick or because they were a big international free agent signing. So those are my takeaways. Thanks for listening. Here, it was a really hectic deadline. Thanks again to everyone that joined on the Slasher Baseball Facebook group conversations and the live videos, especially to John. You were amazing, and I really do appreciate you that. This is not the only baseball show that Slasher Sports Baseball produces. Coming up this weekend on Sunday, we'll have AL Slash Lines. We'll talk about American League trade deadline topics, perhaps, and maybe not just a deadline. The deadline's over. It's time to move on. But we'll touch on that. But there's a whole host of great programming. College football, Slasher U, the YouTube channel at Slasher U is the social media handle. Christian Rao does such a tremendous job simplifying rather than getting all flashy with numbers. I mean, yeah, he knows his numbers, but he breaks things down into practical nuggets that you can then digest. So make sure you tune in for that. We've got Billy Graves, Slasher Sports Cinema. He's sort of on a summer hiatus, but he's going to be moderating a discussion about the movie Where Dare in Tennessee toward the middle of this month. Make sure you look, if you live in the area, make sure you look for some of the promotional material. I'm sure we'll put it out here on Slasher Sports. He knows cinema. People that make movies, that act in movies, love him because he truly engages them and tries to bring out the best of them in all the interviews. And of course, we have lifestyle programming from Suki Suburbia, her Honeydew Project on YouTube channel. It is a must watch every Monday morning. Monday is the scheduled day. Sometimes it might fluctuate, but you have to check out that. I am Steve Beck. I am the agent in charge of National League Central Affairs here at Slasher Baseball. Central Intelligence Podcast drops every Thursday. We'll be back next week. Maybe we can talk more on-field things. But Cardinal fans, take heart. Ideally, if the ownership has the guts to do it, your suffering is going to end. John Mozeliak will buy out the last year of his deal. Forget about the extension. They're going to let him go, which means Ali Marmol can't torture you in-game anymore. It'll be fun to be a Cardinal fan real soon. Let's hope that your favorite NL Central team does something in the coming week that we can talk about on the next edition of Central Intelligence. Thanks for watching.